Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Tuesday, October 7th, 2025, and today we are going to be talking about Proposition 50 in the state of California, as a new poll from a Republican firm finds that the majority of voters in California back Proposition 50 that is set to take place in less than 30 days. A voting referendum across California where voters will make the decision, do you want a new congressional map or do you want to maintain the one that is currently in place in the state of California? Now, this entire conversation really came about after Governor Greg Abbott and President Donald Trump went to the Texas state Republicans and asked for a new congressional map. They went down to Texas and said, we need 5 additional seats to provide a cushion on the national stage for the House of Representatives elections in the 2026 midterm elections. Donald Trump and the GOP know that they are on track for a record defeat across the House races in 2026, so the only way they know how to prevent it from happening is by redrawing the districts, not just in Texas, but in states like Missouri, Indiana, Kansas, Florida, and potentially some others that seem to be exploring the opportunity at redrawing their congressional boundaries. Now, the majority of California voters are backing Proposition 50, which is a Gavin Newsom and citizens-led referendum that would allow voters to make that decision as to whether or not California would implement a new congressional map. A map similar to this one that would ultimately make it so there are only 4 districts here that are safe for the Republican Party. For a bit of context, Texas right now has about 9 Democrats serving in the House of Representatives. Sorry, not 9 Democrats, 13 Democrats serving in the House of Representatives. After this map is implemented, the one that was just passed by the Texas GOP, Democrats are expected to drop down to just 8 or 9 seats across this state. So California responded nearly to a 1-to-1 ratio in their map right now. It is Republicans who have 9 districts in the state of California, but what this new map would do is essentially contain the GOP's vote share and the GOP's number of districts down to just 4 in the largest state in the country. It would be a direct response to what we are seeing in Texas, and the question is, do voters in California pass Proposition 50? So we've been actually anxiously awaiting some new data points here. It's been 2 weeks since we've seen any poll actually fielded, and thankfully Coefficient, which is a Republican firm that does a lot of the Republican internals that you might see in the Senate races and the House races, they decided to poll the state of California. And so what they found here is that essentially asking voters, do you support or oppose Proposition 50? Something that early on in conversation did not seem to have but majority support across the state. Emerson College released a poll in August showing just 33% of California residents supported it. Politico found that by a margin of 28 points, voters opposed Proposition 50. But as more information and as the question was massaged and voters became more aware of exactly why Gavin Newsom was doing this, the numbers started to improve. And they looked a whole lot better as the weeks went on. And in this most recent survey, they looked the best they have of the entire campaign cycle. And this is coming from a Republican internal. And that's really what is the main point here that I think is being made, is that Proposition 50 is something that may be in the realm of possibility. That we saw Republicans very hopeful that they might be able to strike this down. Not Mike Johnson, I'm thinking the other guy, Kevin McCarthy, who served as a congressman from California, very publicly said, I'm going to raise $100 million to shoot down Proposition 50. Well, do you know how much money he's raised since he made that statement? $7 million across the state. Certainly not at all near the $100 million that he promised he would spend, because Republicans know, and the donors do too, that no matter how much money you throw against Proposition 50, it is more than likely going to pass, and voters are changing their minds on Proposition 50 more and more in favor as the days go on. And so while there may have been a possibility that Proposition 50 would have failed a month ago or 2 months ago when it was first unveiled as something that the Democrats were seeing as a strategy point to push back against Texas, well, maybe that isn't happening now because voters have changed their tune. There still will be an opposition. And what this data is suggesting, though, is that the increase in support is getting to a level that similar to that of Kamala Harris's support in California in the last cycle. Because right now, the difference between these two, ultimately speaking, is roughly similar to that and the difference between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. Because the delta on support versus oppose is 17%. On the presidential margin, it was 20%. Proposition 50 seemingly is performing Kamala Harris's margin by just 3 percentage points when it was largely the Democrats that championed the initial proposition that Proposition 50 is seeking to overturn. And so I think we are seeing exactly what we've come to understand about this change in approach from not only Democrats as voters, but Democrats as elected officials. Could you have imagined that 6 years ago, under Donald Trump's first term, this would ever even be a conversation? Donald Trump himself would not even have gone to Texas to redraw the maps because he didn't even do so in 2018. But again, we are in a new stage of politics where the White House and the Oval Office are hell-bent on ensuring that elections go their way no matter how, by any means necessary, that their military-style, invasions of cities are things that they do because they believe that this is the way to do law and order. These are the ways that Democrats have really started to feel very angry about what's happening in Washington, D.C. And based off policy points, rightfully so, because there are fundamental differences between Trump 1 and Trump 2, and Trump 2 in this second administration is going for blood. Seriously. And you think about it from the perspective of, what is the change in Democratic attitude? A whole ton, right? Everything has changed for the Democratic Party, including things like this, that I do believe 6 years ago, I think would have failed. I think that if Democrats had gone to the California voters, who at this point in time, I saw a flashback poll this morning of what Democratic primary voters wanted in 2019. Around this time, October, we were getting into the full swing of it. Biden, Sanders, Warren, right? Names you probably remember, and I'm sure know. But also everyone was running for president at this time. And what I remember, and what I saw in the data today, and I remember covering this, was that 70% of Democratic primary voters in 2019 wanted a president who prioritized bipartisanship over new liberal policies. Just 30% of the Democratic primary electorate said, we want more left-wing policies on the national stage. 70% prioritized bipartisanship. What does a 2019 Democratic primary poll have to do with a 2025 Proposition 50 poll? Arguably, everything. Because it shows that electorate probably was not conducive to something like this. That by a means of voting would have axed out additional Republican power to fight back against them. That's a big reason why Biden easily won that Democratic primary in 2020. A lot of people can argue that the coalition built for Biden was strong, but it was strong because they all leaned more towards Biden than Sanders on the point of centrism. On the point that the Democratic primary voters, especially voters in the South, particularly wanted bipartisanship versus more left-wing policies. And whether you agree or disagree with the approach, the election came the way it did. But in this day and age, in 2025, not only in California, but on the national stage, there's an appetite for something different. And Proposition 50 is a great example of how that is actually turning into tangible support for the Democratic Party. And what this data is telling us isn't even that Gavin Newsom is the driving factor behind Proposition 50. Obviously, without him, this would have never happened at all in California. And Democrats, should this pass, owe Gavin Newsom that at least. But Governor Newsom's approval is 47% in California and 44% disapprove. Now, keep in mind, Republican pollster, his numbers are a lot better and a lot of other data points, but this is just working within the same exact electorate that on Proposition 50 is saying they support it 54-36. And obviously, on party breakdown, Republicans vehemently oppose it. Just 7% of Republicans support it. 85% oppose it. The same amount of Democrats that support it equals the same amount of Republicans that oppose it. But independents or nonpartisan voters support it 55-43 by a 12-point margin. But get this, even if independents opposed it and Republicans opposed it too, California is a state where Democrats outnumber Republicans about 2-1. And that is why in this election, if you do find that there is opposition coming from whoever it might be, it's still likely to pass because California, just as other states are red, California is blue. And so the electoral implications, a lot of these districts that you see right now that are Republican plus 18, 20, 30, 24, 10, 31, all these Republican districts, including the competitive ones, Ken Calvert plus 3.4, right? Young Kim by 10.5. These districts will cease to exist and be drawn in a way that, sure, now the 5th district, we can actually look at this on this edge. When you actually take a look at the Republican Party's vote share, where's their highest amount of support? The 20th district will be Republican plus 40. The 5th district will be Republican plus 27. The 23rd district will be Republican plus 22. And the 40th district will be Republican plus 19. Then, 2 more districts that on the presidential vote share lean towards the Democrats, but are about neck and neck. And then every other district skews towards the Democrats. Meaning that even at their peak, in a red wave, you're talking not a red wave, but in a strong year for the GOP, because maybe a red wave, you'd see some of these other districts fall through, but keep in mind, right, in 2026, certainly not going to happen. Best case scenario for Republicans, if this map passes, which it looks like it will, Republicans will have 6 seats in California. Republicans will have been effectively reduced down from 9 to 6 at best case in 2026 for the GOP. But at worst case, that goes down to 4. And that really does contend directly with what we're seeing in Texas. In fact, there's a possibility. Cuellar, who they drew his district to be 3 points more Republican than it was in 2024. Well, if he won by 6, assuming he's on the ballot, barring, court cases and all of that, assuming he's on the ballot in 2026, there's a chance that Democrats hold on to the 28th district. Republicans will have effectively only gained 3 or 4, rather, in Texas, while losing 5 in California. And the entire purpose of what the Texas Republicans have done in the state legislature to redraw the maps here will have been responded to by California in a way that actually not only counteracts it, but exceeds what the Republicans are doing in Texas. And it might be enough to nullify not only Texas, but in tandem Missouri, making 2 full-blown special sessions, laws, maps signed by the governor, passed by the Senate, passed by the House, all for nothing, because Donald Trump wanted to try to mitigate any losses in 2026. But obviously, that's an impossibility, because he's not popular and because voters don't want to see him and the Republicans in power for as long as they did. And don't get me wrong, right? I do believe that when you look at it from the perspective of the first term, and you look at it from the perspective of this second time around, yes, he improved on his margin, but does that necessarily mean that he's someone who's more popular now? No. His numbers are abysmal, right? The Republicans' numbers are abysmal. Voters don't like the big, beautiful bill. They don't like Mike Johnson. They are unhappy with the current state of the American political environment. And they're unhappy with the economy and foreign policy and healthcare and the government shutdown and Donald Trump as the president, just as it was for Biden and Trump before and Obama, is the one that Americans blame. So it isn't really that shocking that in blue California, the Democrats are on track for a victory in Proposition 50. The margin here is what surprises me, but it may be wrong. In my estimation just a few days ago, doing my 1-month outlook on the November 4th, 2025 elections, I said I thought Proposition 50 would pass by about 5 to 10%. I'm still standing a little bit closer by my prediction, but I could be way off base, because the data points have been directly in opposition to what I've understood, them to tell me versus what I've been saying my prediction is, and that's just a hunch, right? That is really just, there's obviously data that goes into it, but reasonably speaking, I think a lot of what I'm trying to estimate on that is what it feels like the margin is going to be based off things besides the data, right? Based on things like expectations that the polls may not be capturing in, portions of the electorate that don't want to respond to the survey they might be turning out in full force against Proposition 50. These are all things that obviously, we can talk about closer to the election. But if I am wrong, and the data suggests that I might be, on the margin, not in terms of direction, that Proposition 50 may pass by a wide margin, and that it has been inching closer and closer to being nearly identical to that of the last presidential election in California. And if that is the case, Proposition 50 not only passes, but passes with flying colors, similar to that of the first proposition put in place that actually implemented the independent commission that is responsible for redrawing California's maps. So, we'll see. The election is less than 30 days away. Not much money has been raised on the opposition side, but there still is a campaign going. And the vote no on Proposition 50 is not letting up. Vote yes, vote no. These are both very strong campaigns with a lot of money that are spending a lot of money on California right now. And so we will see exactly what happens. But if any of these data points are indicative of what we might expect, Proposition 50 seemingly is more likely to pass than not, and potentially by a massive, massive margin. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video for you to watch, and then a playlist for my 2025 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.